I died on a Tuesday evening in April, not physically, but the death of who I once was felt just as final. Standing in that hotel parking lot, watching my wife entangled with another man, something inside me shattered beyond repair. It all started with small things. First, Amanda began coming home later than usual, explaining it was due to a new project and the need to work overtime. I believed her. Then our schedules diverged so much that we stopped having dinner together. I worked from home in our cozy house in the Boston suburbs while she spent more and more time at the downtown office. We started arguing about time spent together. I complained that she was never home. She claimed I didn't understand the importance of her career. Our intimate life suffered first. The rare moments of closeness became increasingly tense and mechanical. I attributed it to stress and fatigue, tried to be an understanding husband. But that evening when I found her lacy bra under the seat of our car, something inside me broke. Amanda was never careless with her belongings, and this bra was clearly not the kind she wore to work. Instead of immediate confrontation, I decided to try to save our marriage. I booked a table at her favorite restaurant, bought tickets to a Broadway musical touring in Boston. I wanted to surprise her, bring romance back into our lives. But when I told her about my plans, Amanda apologized and said she had already promised to meet colleagues after work to discuss the quarterly report. I looked into her eyes as she said this and noticed for the first time that she avoided direct eye contact. Something in her voice sounded false. At that moment, I made a decision that would forever change our lives. I placed my spare work phone in the side pocket of her bag while she was showering. The GPS tracker in it would give me the answers I so feared. The next day, I watched as a small dot on my computer screen moved around the city. Office, lunch at a cafe near work, back to the office. Nothing unusual until 5 in the evening. Then the dot moved, but not toward our home. It stopped in an area known for its bars and restaurants where, according to Amanda, she was supposed to meet colleagues. I decided to drive there. Parking a few blocks from the bar, I waited. At 8 o'clock, I saw Amanda come out, but not with a group of colleagues, with a tall man in an expensive suit. They were laughing, and his hand rested on her waist with the casual intimacy possible only between people well acquainted with each other's bodies. When they stopped at his car and he leaned in to kiss her, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. I followed them to the Marriott hotel downtown. They got out of the car, holding hands, and disappeared inside. I sat in my car, unable to move, feeling waves of nausea rising to my throat. 3.5 years of marriage, shared plans, dreams of children, all of it crumbled before my eyes. I don't remember how I drove out of the city. My mind was blank, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I just drove, without direction or purpose, until the city lights faded in my rearview mirror. Somehow, I ended up in a small bar on the outskirts of Worcester, about an hour from Boston. The neon sign reading "Last Call" seemed eerily appropriate. Inside, I ordered whiskey. Neat. Then another. I wasn't a heavy drinker, but that night I needed something to numb the pain that threatened to tear me apart. The bartender, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, eventually asked if I was okay to drive. I wasn't, and I told him so with brutal honesty that surprised even me. He asked if I was having woman troubles while wiping the bar counter. I nodded, unable to put into words the devastation I felt. He introduced himself as Mike, extending his hand, and offered some simple wisdom. That whatever it was, it probably felt worse tonight than it would tomorrow. Mike's simple words of wisdom began a conversation that lasted until closing time. He told me about his own wife's infidelity 15 years ago, how he had discovered it, and how it had nearly destroyed him. As he spoke, I felt a strange connection to this stranger. He understood exactly what I was going through. When the bar closed, Mike offered me a place to crash for the night. He lived in a modest house nearby and had a spare room. Under normal circumstances, I would never have accepted such an offer from a stranger, but that night was anything but normal. I followed him home, slept fitfully in his guest room, and woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and a clearer mind. Over coffee, Mike made an unexpected offer. He owned a small trailer in the foothills outside of Pittsfield, about 2 hours west of Boston. He used it occasionally for fishing trips but rarely went there these days. If I needed a place to clear my head for a while, I was welcome to use it. I thanked him, but said I needed to confront my wife first. I drove back to Boston with a strange sense of calm. When I arrived home, Amanda was already there, worried about where I had been all night. I looked at her face, the face I had loved for so long, and simply asked her who he was. Her expression changed instantly, surprise, then fear, then anger. She countered too quickly and too defensively, asking what I was talking about. I told her quietly that I had seen her the previous night at the bar and at the Marriott. Amanda's face paled, but she quickly recovered. She accused me of spying on her, calling it insane and suggesting that I needed help. Her denial, her attempt to make me doubt myself, only strengthened my resolve. Without another word, I left the house. I called Mike and asked if his offer still stood. It did. The trailer turned out to be much nicer than I expected. Nestled among pine trees, with a view of the Berkshire Mountains, it was small but well-maintained. Solar panels provided basic electricity. There was a propane stove and refrigerator, and a well nearby supplied fresh water. It was rustic but livable, and the seclusion felt healing. I spent the day exploring the area, breathing in the clean mountain air, letting the peace of nature begin to soothe my wounded soul. That evening, I tried calling Amanda. Part of me still hoped for honesty, for a chance at reconciliation. She answered on the first ring. She demanded to know where I was, claiming she had been worried sick. I replied that I needed some time and reiterated that I knew what I had seen. She insisted I was being ridiculous and claimed she had been with Sarah and Jennifer from accounting, even suggesting I could call them if I didn't believe her. I knew she was lying. I had seen her with my own eyes. But her continued denial made one thing clear. Our marriage was irrevocably broken. Not just by her infidelity, but by her unwillingness to be honest even when confronted with the truth. I told her I would be back in a few days to get some of my things and hung up before she could respond. Over the next week, I made several trips to our house when I knew Amanda would be at work. Each time, I took a few more of my personal belongings, clothes, books, my computer equipment. I set up a makeshift office in the trailer, contacted my clients to let them know about my temporary relocation, and began adjusting to my new reality. Amanda quickly noticed the disappearing items. Her texts and calls became more frequent, more desperate. She vacillated between anger, "How dare you just leave like this?" concern, "Are you okay? I'm worried about you," and attempts at reconciliation, "We need to talk about this. I miss you." I responded minimally, giving away no details about where I was staying. When she announced an upcoming 3-day business trip to New York with her management team, I saw my opportunity. I waited until the morning after she left, then went to the house one last time. I took only what was truly mine: personal items, mementos from before our marriage, a few photographs. I left all our joint possessions, all the furniture we'd chosen together, all the wedding gifts. On the dining table, I placed my wedding ring and a short note. "I know the truth. I wish you had respected me enough to admit it. Goodbye." I didn't include forwarding information or any way for her to contact me. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and liberation. That evening, while Amanda was still in New York, unaware of my final departure, I changed my phone number. I updated my email addresses, closed our joint bank accounts, leaving her share untouched, and began the process of completely separating our lives. I felt no urge for vengeance, no desire to expose her affair to our friends or her workplace. I simply wanted to move on. Life in the trailer became surprisingly comfortable. The initial shock of downsizing from a 3-bedroom suburban home to a 300-square-foot trailer faded as I discovered the freedom of simplicity. I arranged my workspace by the window overlooking the mountains, started running on the forest trails each morning, and gradually found a rhythm to my days that felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced in years. I met a few neighbors, other year-round residents in the scattered cabins and trailers throughout the area. Most kept to themselves, but were friendly when our paths crossed. Sarah, a wildlife photographer in her early 40s who lived in a cabin about half a mile away, became something of a friend. She showed me the best hiking trails, identified edible plants, and occasionally shared fresh eggs from her chickens. Amanda began sending emails once she discovered I had changed my phone number. At first, I didn't read them, simply filed them away in a folder I never opened. Then came the notification that she had hired a lawyer and was filing for divorce. I hired my own attorney, agreed to an uncontested dissolution, and signed the papers without meeting her face to face. 6 months after I had watched her kiss another man outside that bar, our marriage was legally over. Gradually, I found myself thinking about Amanda less frequently. The pain dulled from a sharp, constant stabbing to an occasional ache. I stopped checking the folder with her emails. I threw myself into my work, expanded my client base, and even started a small side project developing an app for hikers to identify local flora and fauna. One evening, walking back from Sarah's cabin after sharing dinner, I realized I had gone an entire day without thinking about my former life. The realization brought a smile to my face. The mountain air was crisp, the stars impossibly bright overhead, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy. It was almost a year after my departure when I saw her again. I had ventured into downtown Pittsfield for supplies and was leaving a hardware store when I glimpsed a familiar figure across the street. Amanda, her blonde hair shorter than I remembered, was walking out of a real estate office. My heart hammered in my chest as I ducked behind a parked car, watching as she studied a piece of paper in her hand, then continued down the street. I avoided downtown for the next week, unsettled by the chance encounter. Had she tracked me down somehow? Was it just coincidence? I found myself scanning faces whenever I ventured out, a new anxiety I hadn't felt since the early days of my escape. Then, inevitably, it happened. I was in my favorite coffee shop in Pittsfield, laptop open, working on a coding project, when I heard my name. Her voice was so familiar it felt like a physical touch. She called my name. I looked up to see Amanda standing before me, dressed in a tailored blazer and jeans. She looked good, professional, put together, slightly thinner than I remembered. Her voice wavered slightly as she confirmed it was indeed me and asked if we could talk. My first instinct was to refuse, to protect the peace I had so carefully built. But curiosity won out. I agreed to a brief conversation, but declined her suggestion to go back to her hotel room. We found a bench in a small park nearby, maintaining a careful distance between us. Amanda had changed her appearance since our marriage. Her once-long blonde hair now cut into a stylish bob, highlights that hadn't been there before. She wore more makeup than she used to, dressed more expensively. I wondered if these changes were for my benefit or for her new life. I asked how she had found me. She hesitated before answering, explaining that Jennifer from her old office had moved to Pittsfield the previous month and had seen me at a farmer's market, mentioning it when they caught up by phone. I nodded, making a mental note to be more cautious in public spaces. She offered that I looked good, healthier than when we were together. I didn't return the compliment, instead asking directly what she wanted. She took a deep breath and began to talk. The affair had cost her more than she expected. Once I disappeared, rumors spread at her workplace. Her lover, David, a senior vice president, had been engaged to another woman during their affair. When the engagement ended and the company gossip intensified, management stepped in. David was transferred to another division. Amanda was let go with a severance package. She explained with bitterness that he had blamed her for everything, claiming she had pursued him and threatened to tell his fiancée if he ended it. She insisted none of that was true. I listened without comment, feeling strangely detached from her problems. They seemed to belong to another world, one I no longer inhabited. She continued, telling me she had been seeing a therapist and trying to understand why she did what she did and why she threw away what we had. She looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to offer absolution or show interest in her journey of self-discovery. I remained silent. She claimed she had been alone since the divorce, reaching toward me before pulling her hand back. She insisted there had been no one else and that she had thought about me every day, about how she had hurt me and what we could have had. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt a twinge of my old protectiveness toward her. But it passed quickly. She whispered pleadingly, acknowledging she didn't deserve it, but asking for another chance. She suggested we could start over, go slowly, insisting she had changed. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I had once loved enough to promise forever to. The woman whose betrayal had forced me to rebuild my entire life. And I felt nothing. No hatred, no lingering love, no desire to punish or forgive. Just nothing. I quietly told her I couldn't do that. What we had was gone. I was different now. My life was different. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Her breathing became irregular, approaching hyperventilation. Despite everything, I couldn't simply walk away while she was in distress. I moved closer, put an arm around her shoulders, and murmured calming words until her breathing steadied. She apologized while wiping her eyes, saying she hadn't meant to fall apart like that. We found a quieter place to continue our conversation, a small cafe with outdoor seating where we could talk privately. Amanda ordered wine. I stuck with water, wanting to keep my head clear. Curiosity finally got the better of me, and I asked how long she had been in Pittsfield. She replied that it had only been 3 days. She explained she had been looking at properties because she'd been offered a position with a marketing firm in Albany, which would mean relocating to this area. My stomach tightened at her words. The idea of Amanda living nearby, potentially running into her regularly, threatened the peace I had found. I asked if that was why she was here, to tell me she was moving to the area. She shook her head, explaining that she hadn't known if she'd find me. Jennifer wasn't sure if I still lived here, but she had hoped if she did find me, there might be a chance for us. I firmly stated that there wasn't. I explained that what happened had broken something fundamental between us. I didn't trust her. I couldn't trust her. Without that, there was nothing to rebuild. She nodded slowly, seeming to accept my words. She asked hesitantly if I would at least consider staying in touch, suggesting email as a possibility. She admitted missing having me in her life, even just as a friend. Against my better judgment, I gave her my personal email, not the one I used for work or important communications, but one I checked occasionally. I declined to share my new phone number or address. I explained that I'd like us to be civil, but I didn't think regular contact was healthy for either of us right then. She accepted this with surprising grace, and as our conversation wound down, she made a final revelation. She revealed that she was going to take the job in Albany, but she wanted me to know it wasn't to pursue me or make me uncomfortable. It was a good opportunity, and she needed a fresh start too. We parted with an awkward hug, her holding on slightly longer than I did. As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the weight of unanswered questions, of wondering if I had made the right choice in leaving so completely. Now I knew I had. Back at my trailer, I went for a long run, pushing myself harder than usual to clear my head. The encounter had stirred up memories, but they felt distant, like watching scenes from someone else's life. I reflected on how much I had changed in the past year, how much stronger, more self-reliant, and paradoxically, more open I had become. Later that evening, I found an email from Amanda. It was long, emotional, filled with further apologies and memories of our good times together. She ended with an invitation to spend a weekend together at a bed and breakfast she had found in the Berkshires, to see if there's anything left to salvage. I sat with the email open for a long time, considering my response. Finally, I wrote back. I wrote that I was glad we had the chance to talk, but I needed to be clear. I wasn't interested in trying again. I'd found peace in my new life, and I didn't want to disrupt that. I wished her well with her new job and hoped she would find happiness in her next chapter. I asked her to understand that our story had ended, and it was best for both of us to accept that. Her reply came almost immediately. She claimed to understand but wanted me to know she would wait. She told me to take all the time I needed, weeks, months, years if necessary. She insisted she now knew what she had lost. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. 2 weeks later, I received another email. Amanda had accepted the job offer and would be moving to Albany the following month. She hoped we might have coffee once she was settled. I read the email but didn't reply. Part of me suspected this was yet another attempt to maintain a connection, to keep the possibility of reconciliation alive. I deliberately scheduled a business trip to Chicago during the week she planned to move. It was cowardly, perhaps, but I couldn't face another emotional encounter, another round of pleading and tears. I needed to protect the life I had built, the peace I had found. When I returned from Chicago, there was a final email from Amanda. She had moved to Albany, started her new job, and settled into an apartment there. She thanked me for our conversation and said she now understood that our time together was truly over. She believed she would soon meet someone who would make her happy, someone like the man living in the cabin half a mile from my trailer. She wrote that Sarah had mentioned me often when they spoke. She could hear the affection in Sarah's voice. She advised me not to wait too long to tell Sarah how I felt, claiming life was too short for regrets. I stared at the screen, surprised at the mention of Sarah. While we had become friends, I hadn't considered anything beyond that. But Amanda's words made me reflect on our relationship, the easy conversations, the comfortable silences, the gradual sharing of our life stories. Had there been something growing between us that I was too wounded to notice? That evening, I hiked to Sarah's cabin and invited her to dinner at my place the following night. Her smile as she accepted told me everything I needed to know. I never replied to Amanda's final email. There was no need. In her own way, she had given me a parting gift, a gentle nudge toward possibilities I had been too cautious to explore. I hoped she would find someone who made her happy too, though I suspected she might struggle with fidelity again. Some patterns are hard to break. As I prepared dinner for Sarah the next evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The devastating discovery of betrayal, the pain of separation, the slow process of rebuilding a life true to myself rather than defined by someone else's expectations. I had lost a marriage but found a strength I never knew I possessed. The mountains outside my window caught the last rays of sunset, turning golden in the fading light. In an hour, Sarah would arrive, and we would share a meal, stories, laughter. Tomorrow, I would work on my hiking app, run my usual trail, perhaps plan a weekend camping trip. Simple pleasures, genuine connections, authentic living. I had learned that healing doesn't mean the absence of scars. It means building a life around your wounds that honors them without being limited by them. It means accepting that some questions will never have satisfying answers. It means understanding that while trust, once broken, may never be fully restored, the capacity to trust again, differently, more wisely, remains. Above all, I had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do when facing betrayal is not to fight or seek revenge, but simply to walk away. To release your grip on a story that no longer serves you and begin writing a new one, word by word, day by day, choice by choice. Standing there in my small kitchen, surrounded by the scent of simmering sauce and fresh bread, I felt something I had not expected to feel again: contentment. Not the frantic happiness of new love or the complacent comfort of long marriage, but something deeper and more enduring: the quiet joy of being precisely where I was meant to be, living a life that was authentically mine. Outside, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. I opened a bottle of wine to breathe, set the table for two, and waited for Sarah to arrive.